So we're going to talk about the healing power of acceptance. It's a very powerful subject, isn't it?
Yes, because it could be a lot of things.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So we need to clarify first, don't we? And
Yeah,
get
I
clear
think
on
so.
what it is. So acceptance, when we hear acceptance, there are a lot of things that come to mind, but I'm going to read a definition to get us started. Does that sound good?
Yeah, for sure.
All right. So this is a really cool definition, I think, because it really gets down to the psychological reasons that we accept. And this is one thing I found online that I love. Acceptance means fully acknowledging the facts of a situation and not fixating on how it shouldn't be that way. So, what do you think? What would be a good working definition of acceptance for you, and what's your experience of acceptance, Neyda?
So the first thing that comes to mind is when people say it is what it is, right?
Hmm.
Um, and that's kind of like a cop out because it's not really it is what it is. It's more like it is the acceptance for something where you can move on for the rest of the day, or are you going to hold a grudge on it, right? Or is it
Right,
still going to take rent space in your brain? Then you're not accepting.
right, right. So, I think it's important to talk about. Hello, Tara Emerson. Tara is a very old friend of mine, aren't you, Tara? So, okay, so acceptance. What acceptance is not is suffering. When we are in non-acceptance, which is unfortunately the natural state of human beings so much of the time, we're saying it should not be this way, which is the opposite. And we're number one trying to control what can't be controlled, and we're wishing things could be different, right? Those are two main things that happen. So we go from, if we're going through our day and we go into non-acceptance, we become like this. We become contracted. And the reason that we go into non-acceptance, I mean, our brains are wired that way. Our brains go into fight or flight,
Wait,
and they're trying,
hold
right?
up. Before you go on with the definition, I think let me give examples of when we would need acceptance. One, breakup of a relationship. Um, that's a loss.
Mm-hmm.
Uh,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Grieving for whatever
Mm-hmm.
reason,
Yeah.
accepting, the loss of a loved one or what have you.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and like you were alluding to, I'm just trying to give examples to what you're describing is any situation in which you feel some sort of grief, loss, out of control. Would you think that's right?
No, I wouldn't say that.
Ooh,
I wouldn't
nice.
say that. I love it. I love the way you don't mind sparring. So we have it's non-acceptance is an add-on. So we're going to experience pain. We're going to experience the ouch of life. We're going to experience grief. We're going to experience loss. Life is up and down. We experience joy and we experience sorrow. There are sometimes we are sold that if we say enough affirmations or if we meditate long enough, we're going to get to some place where we're going to feel okay all the time. And I would suggest, certainly from my own experience, from somebody who's really tried that route, that there is no such thing as getting to a place where we don't hurt. So when someone leaves us that we're in love with, it's a natural response to go into grief, and we have to feel that. And I'm coming to a point of what acceptance is in my experience, and please tell me what your experience is and if you disagree. So if someone pulls out in front of us in traffic and screams at us, we may feel a surge of anger. When someone leaves us, we may feel, well, of course, we're going to feel a lot of hurt. So if any kind of loss, now what's another example of something that would really be painful in life, Neyda, would you say?
Uh, Job loss, um, financial loss, not just job, but
Mhm.
like, whatever. Um, can anything be a loss? I mean, it just depends on what you define it as, right?
So a lot of, so there's loss, there's worry when we project into the future, and when it comes to finances, we can worry. So we have these experiences of pain, and there's a difference between pain and suffering. This is the point I'm coming to, is pain is, this really hurts. This is painful. It's part of life. The add-on that is unnecessary is the suffering, and that comes from the working definition that we had, is it shouldn't be this way. That's when the mind, that's non-acceptance. That when the mind comes in, I would suggest, and says it should not be this way. So the act of acceptance is, and we can go into this in this conversation, I would suggest that it's knowing that things are exactly the way they are, and getting in touch with what we can't change. So it's the serenity prayer that a lot of us know, is grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change. That's acceptance. And then the courage to change what we can, which is take the action at this moment that we can. So pain is inevitable. It's part of life. And the suffering is when it's prolonged longer than it needs to, when it's exacerbated and becomes much, much bigger when we aren't accepting. So when we add, this should not be happening to me, why is this happening to me? And we go into a story of me and my pain, and we're fighting it, and in a psychological level, saying, no, 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 this shouldn't be happening. Anything but this, that is suffering, is what I would say.
So you're saying non-acceptance equals suffering. And the acceptance is being, and this is where the problem lies, right? Because you can tell yourself, I accept the situation, mentally, but it comes from a feeling within. That's really when you're really accepting. So the question is, how do you get to that point? How can you have that mind and heart coherence so they're aligned and you have a true acceptance?
That's a beautiful question. So that feeling inside that you're talking about, I would suggest, is being present, being in this moment. When we are, when we're when we're in our minds and we're projecting into the future or going into the past, it's very hard to suggest, because that's story. Now, easy, so much easier said than done, but the story is where non-acceptance happens, where if only things would have been different, and we tell ourselves a story about the past, about how it could have happened differently, or this imaginary future that hasn't happened yet, and that we're wondering what could happen, and if we notice, because we have cognitive bias, because our brains are wired for survival, so we're looking at what could go wrong, or we're thinking about the past and thinking about what did go wrong, and so it doesn't happen again. It's basically the saber-toothed tiger that jumped out at me and it almost killed me. So I'm projecting into the future about this saber-toothed tiger that I don't want it to happen. So you can fill in any story about that. The person I loved left, or the car that I loved was wrecked, or whatever. Well, what's going to happen in the future where I'm afraid I'm never going to meet somebody else, or I'll never find a car like that car I had, or whatever. But that lack of being present is lack of acceptance, because what's real is this moment. And when we see the situation as it is in this moment without projecting scenarios, that's when there's less suffering, which is less acceptance. So our natural state, we notice when we take deep breaths and we relax, or we're distracted by being plugged into something at work, and we feel relief from, as they say in 12-step programs, so I hear, is the bondage of self. We have relief from the bondage of self by this relaxing into the present moment. So our natural state when we're relaxed is acceptance, is being in the present moment. And what arises will have pain and have joy and everything in between, but we won't add anything to it, and it won't last long. Our emotions will come and go, and they won't stay and turn into a depression or massive anxiety. I'm using that as an excuse, as an example, because depression is past and anxiety is future. So that's what I would say.
So I'm hearing a lot of things going on. So basically, the end statement that you just said was this too shall pass, is what I'm hearing. But let's take it back a step, because with a few things, great in concept, great in theory. Be present. Definition of being present. What does that mean? The other thing too is, I think when it comes down to acceptance, everything, I'm going to make a big assumption that for the most part, everyone, wherever they are in their journey in life, they understand what the word acceptance means. They have a general understanding of it. But what happens when you're triggered, right?
Yeah.
What happens when that car does cut you off and you're like, flipping them off, honking, mofo, not knowing whether they're just being an asshole or they're actually having to go get somewhere as soon as possible. If I'm triggered at that point, I'm definitely not accepting. I'm doing everything opposite, right? So for you to tell me that we just need to be present, that currently is my presence. I'm flipping you off and doing whatever because I just got triggered. So let's talk about handling the acceptance at that moment, right? It's a fact. Somebody cuts you off. Okay, that's out of your control. That's acceptance. And then you're talking about, finding the peace, the serenity prayer, right? Can that be applied at that moment? Obviously, it takes practice and getting to that point. So step one, you're triggered. Let's just say we've never heard of acceptance. We've never heard of mindfulness. We've never heard of how to address. We've never heard of the serenity prayer. What's step number one? How do you become present?
I'll start at step number 0. And step number 0 is, hopefully when we're driving down the road, we are already have a degree of presence. Okay, so what the hell does presence mean? Presence means we are aware. Our awareness, we're not lost in our minds, and we're aware, in touch with our senses. We can see the difference of, if anyone who's listening right now can take a slow, deep breath in through their nose and out through their mouth and become aware of their feet on the floor and become aware of their arms on the chair, if they're on the chair, and just look around and notice your senses. I can notice that I'm going to be less likely to be triggered in the first place if I'm more grounded, because I'm more relaxed. And when I'm more relaxed, I have more control over my reactions. So we're not always going to be that way. So we're talking, this is only one level of acceptance that we're talking about. But when there's that reaction, that knee-jerk reaction, it's, number one, we accept that we had that reaction and not judge ourselves. And are you talking about if we've already flipped that person off because we weren't present? Okay, so we've flipped that person off. we accept, okay, this is actually what happened at this moment, and there's nothing I can do about it. So if you can clean it up and make it right, you can, but you just gather yourself and know that you lost the ability to choose in that moment because you weren't in the state of presence, which isn't in the state of acceptance, and you learn from it rather than beat yourself up over it. That would be the one part of it, and also, you know, everything that happens is happening because it's meant to happen, and there's nothing we can do about it. So we can start to practice acceptance on that level too, and know that we learn from things. But that's just in that example, and using being in the present moment. That's what I would say about that. Does that make sense?
Would you apply that same instance when you've lost your mother or your father or a family member?
Okay, this is a great question. So your mother has died. So there's grief. Non-acceptance in that situation is it's lack of when it's a lot of the times it's lack of accepting our emotions. What happens when we have horrible things in our life? We try to stuff our feelings. We try to numb ourselves, and it doesn't work. So one way that we don't accept is we try to distract ourselves. Our whole society is set up that way, right? You know, whether we drink, we smoke weed, we binge watch television shows, we get addicted to dating and sex, we we could just keep going on the ways that we go to. So that's one level of not accepting our emotions. Now, of course, that the quicker we can face and accept the emotions that are coming up inside of us and not make them into a story of this shouldn't be happening, number one, and we don't numb ourselves and try to ignore it, because that will keep it going if we're ignoring it. And it will also, if we're trying to numb ourselves, and it will also keep it going if we make it into, why did this happen? This shouldn't have happened, and I should have had a better relationship with my mother, and now she's gone. You know, this happened. The situation happens, number one, and number two, what's happening inside of me is what's happening. So another degree of acceptance is feeling our emotions fully. So grieving consciously is what you could say, which is let emotions come. It comes from the word emovere, which is disturbance. It's something that comes and goes. And ideally, if we're feeling, it could last seconds to minutes. And this is what a mentor taught me, a guy named David Mailer. And I have started to discover this, that when an emotion comes, like grief, it comes in waves, right? So it's sadness and it hurts, and we may and to locate where it is, maybe it feels like you've been punched in the gut, or your heart feels like it's going to break. Well, just feel it, and if you can, stop and give it the attention that it needs. And what you'll find is grief. At the bottom of grief, there's love, and there is. And it's there for a reason, for us to process it, to use that example. And we will grieve a lot quicker if we're in acceptance that A, this happened, and B, that this happened, and this person died at the time they were supposed to, and I had the exact relationship with that person that I had, and it was the way it was supposed to be, and my emotions that are coming in the way that my mind and my body was built for it to come up. And grieving is personal, but we grieve with attention, without story, without fighting it, without trying to run from it, is what I would say about grief. And you know, I've dealt with grief in my life, as many of us have, in recent years, and we all know what that's like.
So a couple of things come to mind, because I feel like acceptance and these examples that you have said is not standalone. And you brought it up, different things there are what we would call addictions. Could be addictions, you know, like you were saying, to sex, could be to food, could be to work, just anything other than dealing with the situation. So you have whatever, in this case that we're using right now, the grief, your mother died, and you're trying to deal with it. And then you just stick into what you would think unconsciously that you're coping with it by going through something that makes you feel comfortable, right?
Yeah.
Which would be your food, which would be your work, or working out, you know, even.
Sure.
And I think those two, I think always go hand in hand for the most part. So when you're dealing with a situation like that, and then you have that other component, which would be the whatever you have as your addiction, it becomes probably harder to deal with, right? And I think we've all gone through this. So when you have those two components, it makes it that much harder to get to the acceptance level in which you're talking about, trying to describe.
Yeah, and you know, the thing that's natural is we don't want to feel pain, of course, right? I mean, God, I know that so well. And the thing that we don't want to see when we're hurting is our emotions are there to give us messages, right? Anger is there to tell us we need boundaries a lot of times. Um, Sadness is telling us where we don't want to go anymore, or that we love something and that we're longing for something. Grief is a tricky one because it's just the processing of something that we loved. But these emotions, they're beautiful and they're there to move us. I would suggest, and what I'm learning, and believe me, I've been addicted I've been addicted to things in my life, and as we all have. I mean, we're all addicts on some level.
Mm-hmm.
But when there's grief, I mean, when there's any kind of emotion that happens, when we deny it, we're denying what it's there to tell us. So we're all addicts, I would say. I mean, whether it's looking at our cell phone, I mean, I tried to go a work day with just working on my computer and putting my cell phone away, and I couldn't do it because I'm addicted to it. You know, so even that, looking at our phone all the time, or always needing to have our TV on, you know, whatever it is. Or some addiction is drama, just going into
Yeah.
telling people our problems. And, you know, we all have our ways to distract from the reality of this moment. And what I would love to say is something somewhat esoteric, but at the same time very practical, which is life is there to teach us lessons. And if you're not spiritual, then just know that, like, obviously, if we don't learn a lesson, we keep learning it over and over. Right? Why do you think that
Yeah,
is?
don't
Why
get
do you
me
think that
started on
is?
that. I'm all about the esoteric and metaphysical. I can tell you the whole concept of like the lessons that this is the earth. We're here on earth just for this experience, period. You chose the lesson, but that's something else. That's something, you know, that could be a different topic. But to your point, if I think one of the things that is hard for people to accept, there we go, accept, or conceptualize, is that um, our job here is to learn lessons. And once we learn a lesson, we go to the next lesson, right? And I just heard something on a podcast, is the bigger the challenge, the bigger the breakthrough.
The bigger
Um,
the challenge, the bigger the breakthrough.
yeah. So
Yeah.
isn't that a fantastic? Because what I, well, how that I interpreted was, you have a choice of how to go through life in a
Mm-hmm.
gentle manner, where it's slow. And you're right, Tara. It does keep presenting itself, and the challenges get harder and harder. 100%. Um,
Yeah.
uh, Wait, now I lost. This is my ADHD. What was the last thing I said?
We were talking about breakthroughs. No, I was reading the comments too.
Yeah,
And
me too.
Tara's a seeker, and she has a lot of wisdom, just like you do, Neyda. And yeah, you're talking about the bigger the breakthrough. I mean, the bigger the pain, the bigger the breakthrough, and
Oh,
that's brilliant.
oh, I remember. Hold on, before I forget again. Before I forget. Uh, so, okay. We have a choice of going slowly, right? So, in other words, how long are you going to take to accept and move on from this lesson in life, right? How long are you going to take to go through the serenity process, through the grieving process? That's up to you, right? So you can go slowly but surely, knowing that
Yeah.
your breakthroughs are going to match, right? It's the whole what you put out, you get back,
Right.
right? Or are you going to go balls to the wall and say, fuck it, I'm going to take this head on, however I may feel, however it may affect me, but I'm going to get through this and see that, because I don't see the light at the end of the tunnel, but it's there. I don't
Yes.
see it, but I have faith that it is at
Yes.
that point.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that was the whole point of what you were saying about like this life is a lesson, and you are in control. You really do have control of how fast or slow you want to go through this, and I'm in full agreement with Tara. I mean, if you don't learn the lesson this lifetime, guess what? You're coming back next lifetime, and it's harder until you finally get it. And that's when
Yeah.
you have a dark night of the soul, and then you get your life ripped out of you. Everything falls apart in your life. Everything. You know this. You've gone through this. I went through this. We'll probably go through it again.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then it sucks. It's so easy to fall back into the victim mode and say, why did this happen to me? I was doing so well and blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
It's so easy to fall back into that.
Yeah, so I mean, I'd love for thank you all for joining and listening, and I would love for everyone to just and type in if you have experiences with this, but this is really such an important part with what we're talking about. I think with acceptance is when we first think this is the last thing in the world that I would want to have happen, and our minds are going to go to that first, and that non-acceptance. But if you look at your life, can you see that the things that you wish that didn't happen, they end up being gifts that we learn when we move through them. So we learn when we move through them and learn the gifts. So I'll just speak from my own experience. When I have done those things that we're talking about, which has gone into a lot of drama and a lot of story, and I'm fighting what happened, this thing that I would rather have not happened, or I try to numb myself in whatever way that I've done it, then the same thing keeps I mean, I'm just not learning that lesson fully because I'm not awake and I'm not learning what it needs to be learned. Because like right now, I'll just share with myself, I was experiencing anxiety today, which is something I don't usually experience that much. But you know what? It's there. I could think, I don't want anxiety, so I'm going to go try to find some way to numb myself, or whatever it was. But that anxiety is there to tell me that I need to get into action and do certain things. So it's actually a gift. Um, when so when so anyway, I'll let you talk, Neyda. What do you think?
No, I just have all these visuals like anxiety, and I just see people hyperventilating into a brown paper bag. That's usually what anxiety brings, and there's no you're not going to be like, oh well, thank you, anxiety, thank you for bringing this to me. That's not the typical reaction for somebody who's not used to doing the stuff that we do, which we go into it just to get more knowledge of it, right? So for us, it becomes more like the seeker for wisdom, and we can get to that point. But I have to say that it does take practice,
It does.
and but it does get easier. So that's the silver lining. So for every, there's this cause and effect. For every action, there's a reaction. All of that stuff. And it's true, when you have those emotions, those thoughts, if you go along with it, then just through the laws of causation, you're going to amplify that thought, that feeling, that trigger. So I think that's one thing I use myself to remember that if I feed into it, right? If I didn't feed into the drama, I'm only amplifying the drama, and I'm not allowing the space to be able to heal from whatever it is I just experienced, or to process and integrate whatever I just experienced, and to understand what these emotions, which I call GPS, and that's not something I'm so witty that I came up with. It's from Esther Hicks, Abraham Hicks. It's a GPS, and you have to reel it in. So I always think about the laws of cause and effect and all that stuff. I don't want to amplify it, right? And this, oh my gosh, now we're going something different, but just for people who are always looking online for videos on manifestation, right? When you're trying to manifest anything, whether it's healing, whether it's money, whether it's whatever, when you have those additional thoughts that amplify, you are now blocking your manifestations at that point, because you're not
Yeah.
at that frequency, you're not at that vibration. So
Yeah.
let's bring it
Yeah,
back
let's
to acceptance. Let's
bring it
bring
back.
it back to everything, right?
So,
So when it comes to acceptance, comes down to if it's hard, it's easier to say I accept. It's hard to feel the belief. It's hard to feel that acceptance. But
yeah.
I think, no, go ahead.
I'm sorry. You finish what you're saying.
No, I was just going to say, if one can just think of, even if it's just like on a top level, topsoil level, if I can just remember a simple rule that if I feed into this feeling, if I feed into this thought, then I'm just adding onto that fear, onto that grief, onto that. I'm not doing myself any justice.
Yeah. We're feeding into the thought. Yeah. Yeah. So, yeah. So one thing that I think is helpful is when we have a painful emotion that arises, that it's not in our whole body if we become present. So if we're experiencing worry, and maybe it even turns into anxiety, something that can be really helpful is to locate where that is in your body. And if you locate where it is in your body, you can notice, say, maybe I feel I feel contracted in my chest. So where do I feel openness? Well, I feel openness maybe in my arms and my legs, or maybe I feel openness in my head. And if we start to focus on the place where there is this feeling of openness, which really is acceptance, where there's a part of our body that isn't fighting it, then we can hold that in, hold a space more for it so it doesn't take us over. And that's another thing that can be helpful. Just to piggyback on what you're saying with when we make it bigger by going into a lot of stories and thinking about it.
So explain what that. I think it's easy to understand where you feel it. Like if you have if you're feeling something, an emotion that's very strong, most people they do feel in their chest, like, or they can't breathe, right? They feel it's that part of the anxiety, they can't breathe, and it's very easy. But when you're talking about openness, where are you open? Whether it's, in your mind, are you open, in the sacral region or wherever you're talking about, what does that mean? Like, what am I focusing on at that point?
Yeah. So you can say sensations, but the real word is energy. So like, if everybody who's listening, if you were to, I mean, one way to do it is you close your eyes. And how would you know that you had a hand if you just held out your hand and closed your eyes? Well, you can feel that, right? You can feel a tingling sensation. If you close your eyes, how do I know I have a head? Well, you could say energy. There are greater and lesser degrees of sensation in your body. And the sensation that is really dense feeling and seems to have more heaviness, well, we call that a negative feeling or a negative emotion. So that can be practiced through meditation, or you don't even have to sit. It's when we're walking along or when we're in our car, we can start to just scan our bodies and notice. So like right now, as you're listening to this, if you scan your body, like right now, I can feel a little bit of tightness. I can feel more tightness in my solar plexus, which is the soft spot underneath your ribs. That's where I feel a lot of my emotion. So if that got even more dense, that could turn into a painful emotion. But there are places in me, actually in my head and in my heart, I can feel, and you can do it just by sensing it. I can feel more openness, and it feels like joy. I mean, it can feel like peace. It can feel like joy. It can feel like just less sensation. What we feel freer in places where there's less density, and we suffer more in the places where there's more contraction. And when something triggers us, to go back to that contraction gets really strong. Or if we trigger ourselves from a thought like, oh my God, I've got to do this to make money, and I've got to do this, and I'm behind on this, that can cause anxiety. Well, yes, when the thing is it can take us over, and we have to breathe into a paper bag, and that's okay. But a way to try to catch it is to start scanning our body and to become present, those two things. Number one, if you follow your breath, because the breath is always in the present moment, unless you're hyperventilating.
I was going to say,
but that's the body's trying to get oxygen, when it happens. But when in any other situation, you crack me up, Neyda. In any other situation, when we follow our breath, we get grounded in the moment, and we're grounded in our bodies. Sensations around our bodies. We, number one, get to in the present moment. That always keeps us from going into story and going into suffering. But the other thing is we find, as they call it in somatic work, a resource, which you're familiar, which is all I'm talking about, a place in your body where you're not contracted. And that keeps you from us from being taken over by something. And so by being grounded, that helps us accept. And also, we just know that we can't do anything about the way our body reacts, but we can do something about not making it worse by saying this shouldn't be happening, and by trying to get away from it. When we try to get away from whatever's happening, that is the rub. That's where the suffering starts happening, in my experience.
yeah, because I was saying, what is it? Resistance. Well, what you resist persists and then magnifies at that point. But what I want to talk about too is also the definition of, because now you're introducing new terms. So grounding, right?
Mm-hmm.
So what does that grounding mean, or what can it mean? Because it could be many things for many people. So what is a general, I guess, example of what grounding is?
Yeah. Neyda's so good, and I'll throw out these terms, and she's like, "All right, tell people what the hell you're talking about." So thank you.
That's my job.
You are doing very good at your job. So being grounded that's being aware is really what we're talking about. Because when we lose awareness, we lose control over our minds and our emotions. I love what Eckhart Tolle says is, we usually don't his famous book, The Power of Now, at the very beginning, he says, to put it rightly, most of us most of the time, don't use our minds. Our minds are using us. And the reason our minds are using us is because we're not grounded, which what that means is we're just not aware. So if we get, say we're depressed, say we're grieving, but it turns into a really horrible depression, that isn't always necessary. The depression, when we get into depression, which I'm no stranger to, when we go into a depression, the question is, what were the the thoughts that got me there. And when thoughts get us into a bad depression or get us into a really bad anxiety, just because we're using those two examples, or a rage or whatever it is, what were those initial thoughts? Well, we can trace them back maybe, but we weren't aware enough to know that they were happening, and our mind was just going on autopilot. So the practice is, number one, okay, this is happening. This person, trying to use a real example of my life. Well, this person says, yeah, I'm not going to do this for you, and you want them to do it. I'm just going to use an example. You want them to do something for you. So the first response could be anger. So rather, we have a choice at that. I have experienced, we have a choice. We can say, oh, this anger is happening. That's number one. And number two, this person did what they did, period. Sometimes we can help with acceptance by saying, they don't have to do what I say. It's just my non-acceptance that says that, because I want my way. But this situation is the way it is, and what's happening inside of me is anger. If I am aware, which is grounded, then it's less likely that it's not going to turn into a rage. The anger turns into rage when it gets into a story of that person it screwed me over and they shouldn't have done that, or whatever the situation is, or that person died and there's so many things that were unsaid or whatever. It's the acceptance that this situation is the way it is, to go back to that definition. And it's seeing that the situation, the fact of a situation, and not fixating on how it shouldn't be that way. Our minds always, almost always, in my experience and understanding, go to it shouldn't be that way. Yeah. When we become present, when we become grounded, which means become aware, and we can do that by being in our breath and by seeing that a situation, we can't change the situation, it already is the way it is, then it's less likely to turn into the suffering.
I think for me, that would probably be step number one in my life. Only because I have so many voices in my head, right, going on at the same time. So if I were to have something, a circumstance that would happen, right, that would get me angry, for instance, and then if I start conversing with myself and saying, why did that get me upset? Like, what was so big? What I tell my kids, and as they're learning how to cope with anger or just emotions in general, is it a glitch or is it a stitch, right? A glitch is just a glitch in the matrix that can just, whatever. And then a stitch, more like a stitch, it's like something, it was bad and it needs some mending, right? So as I start going through having these own conversations within myself, like, why did I really get upset? By the time I continue on with my conversations, I've already almost forgotten what's happened, or I've already calmed down in the situation because I get lost in my own thoughts.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it's so funny how that works, because all of us have monkey chatter going on 24/7, and it's so funny how during the day we're always tired, but as soon as you're ready to go to bed, all of a sudden you're thinking about, oh, I wonder where the tie should go on a giraffe. Should it be on the top of the neck? Or should it be on the bottom of the neck? You start having these random thoughts all over the place, right? So I use that mind chatter, because that's how my brain works, is constantly, and you know me because I never shut up, I'm constantly talking. I pretty much subdue the situation without even realizing, because by the time I'm done with my conversation, I'm like, I'm over it, moving on. And that's the awareness, right? Because I start with, for me, it's easier to say, why did that get me upset? Well, because so-and-so said this. Okay, but that's them. Why? Everyone has a different opinion. Everyone has their truth. How am I going to deal with that? Should it take up space in my brain? So I don't know if it's numbing. I don't know if it's just, I just wear myself out from all the thought process or what. But that's for me would be step number one, because it's easy. I'm already talking to myself in so many different conversations, and it just just kind of mellows out, versus your dating situation happens and you're like, okay, breathe. I'm breathing. Nothing's happening, and being in the present time, in the mindfulness, and in the breath, in other words. But it's trial and error for everyone. So what I want to do is, what you have been doing is providing different, I guess, alternatives. So let's recap. The first one is breath, catching your breath. The other one is feeling into where you feel the emotion. Is it in your chest? Is it in your throat? Is it in your head? And then focus on what is not being contracted, right? The third one is
And then let me
the
just
ground.
interrupt there. Thank you, Neyda. But I just want to interrupt there because I may not have finished this thought enough. Is also just and then letting the emotion be there for as long without trying to get rid of it, but just honoring it, letting it be there. But it doesn't take you over when you notice that this isn't all of you. That there's a part of you that's not contracted or angry or heartbroken or whatever it is. Okay, go ahead. Sorry.
No, was that number three, or was that part of number two?
Well, it's part of number two because if we were saying you can resource yourself, and
Hmm.
then at the same time, when that emotion, so that keeps the emotion from taking you over, is when you realize, oh, this isn't. Where do I feel this anger? Oh, okay, I feel it in my head, but actually around my head and in my chest, I feel open, for instance. So I'm just going to be aware of this, or maybe it's in my gut. Yeah, I'm just going to be aware of it. I'm going to let it be there, and we don't. We're not saying we're going to get to a place where we're not going to have emotions, but we're going to get to a place where our nervous system and our body and our brain is trained for things to move through us quicker because we're accepting it through our attention rather than trying to get away from it. So and that's the thing, things move through us. And when they move through us, they start to inform us because these emotions are there. They're our friends, like I was saying, but rather than being things that stay and turn into a mood and can turn into our identity. Like we know people who are like, I am an angry person who doesn't take crap from anyone, or I'm a victim. They've made an emotion that could have just moved through them into a mood and then into their identity. So it's attention through not letting it take you over. Resource yourself by knowing the place where there's not this contraction, and then just allowing that feeling to be there and feel it fully if you can, and let it pass through. So anyway,
Okay.
that's yeah,
Okay. So I get it. It's the resourcing, and as you're having that open space, just continue to allow the emotion to flow
right,
through. But you're just changing the focus, basically. You're
right.
allowing the pain, the suffering, whatever it is, but you're just trying to focus on something that is not the pain in your chest or the throat or the solar plexus, or whatever the case may be. Okay. And then number three was grounding slash awareness, right? Which is how, um, tracking why you feel that way, um, and trying to, it's tracking why you felt that way, and coming to terms with whatever that's the way they are. It's me wanting to have it my way, and I'm not getting my way, so now I'm throwing a tantrum, or something of the situation. So now we have three techniques. Was
Yeah,
there a
yeah.
fourth?
So yeah, and I want to just add to that. Sorry to interrupt, but the when we can track back and see where we have one thing that I was saying is we can track back and see what was the initial thought that caused something to turn into a mood. But I also want to say that um, that non-acceptance is basically no, and it's this, and acceptance is yes, and it's relaxation. That's that's the ultimate thing,
Oh,
which
I
yeah.
like that.
So accept non-acceptance is no, and acceptance is yes. So we've had those three things that we talked about, but I also want to talk about what presents itself in our lives. And I want to quote Marcus Aurelius. He said, seek whatever is woven into the pattern of your destiny for what could more aptly fit your needs. I felt,
You
I
remembered
love,
all of that? You
yeah,
actually remember that?
I love that quote.
That's good.
Yeah. Yeah, it's seek whatever is woven into the pattern of your destiny for what could more aptly fit your needs. So this is the other thing that we talked about, that when something that we think should not be happening, we look back and we see that we could actually, if we're going to label them, we could label them as gifts, because growth begins at the end of our comfort zone. And we learn through things that are uncomfortable, and if we move through them and use that lesson, it's going to be painful. It's going to be painful. But the thing is, and I am not perfect at this, that's for sure. But if we can accept what's woven into the pattern of our destiny, acceptance does not mean we like it necessarily. It just means that we don't say this shouldn't be happening. So if something happens that we don't like, it's good to remember, and we can practice remembering this so we have it in the back of our minds, that things that we don't like end up being gifts, and that's where we grow. But when something happens that is painful, we move through that pain and we come to the other side by being stronger, deeper. We have, our lives are bigger, and it comes back to that Buddhist saying, no mud, no lotus. In other words, of course, the beautiful lotus has to have the mud to grow in. So we have to have pain, but how horrific things get, and how what's so interesting, it's when we try not to face it, when we try not to face it by saying, I mean, we think we're doing something about it by saying this isn't okay with me, even when it's already happened, or we try to numb ourselves. But if we just feel it by using some of these tools, we face, feel, accept what's happening on the outside, accept what's happening on the inside, let the emotions happen, and then they'll move through us quicker by being present. And as we do that, we can actually learn and grow so much faster. And we won't, as Tara mentioned, that these lessons, if we say no, or we just try to numb ourselves, which I've done plenty of, then that same lesson comes back because we haven't learned it. So it's that acceptance. It's so beautiful, because acceptance means, okay, I'm gonna have pain, and maybe I will suffer a little bit, but I don't have to go into a downward spiral and make this thing that I don't like into just a no, 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 into our personality, just fighting everything. The people who we notice that we admire, who are evolved, have this yes to them. It doesn't mean that they're all like, oh, everything's great all the time, but they've learned how to accept, I feel like.
Yeah, one thing that you just said that kind of hit hard is no matter what, we're going to have pain, different levels of it. That is life. That is the path of the journey of life. And to your point is, how much suffering will you attach to it, right? Um, if we keep on getting the same lessons to learn over and over, then you have a choice to make. Do you want to stay stagnant in your growth, or do you want to grow? Um, and to me, that is a very big thing, because I am on a path of growth, um, and of learning, and I don't want to stay stagnant. And it goes back to, are you okay where you are? Do you really feel comfortable in your situation, having to continue with these same lessons, these same heartbreaks, these same everything? And if so, great. that is your path, that's what you choose. But do you want to really move on from that? And if so, then you have to do the work and and face those feelings and allow them and process them. So like exactly like you were saying, it's like you can go move through it much faster. What level of suffering are you willing to I guess take? And how are you going to change your mindset to lessen the suffering to move on faster? Does that make sense? Like it made
Yeah,
perfect sense in my head.
yeah, it does, Nate. It does. And then as we do this work, I think the hardest thing in the last frontier of acceptance, which I'm certainly working on and struggling with sometimes, is self acceptance. Because
Mm.
we're on a path of trying to learn and be better. It's so easy to get into this idea of I I should have done better, and the truth is we couldn't have. we How could we have? Because we did what we did. We had to learn what we learned, as we know, and we had the conditioning and the background, our upbringing that we had, and the level of awareness that we had, and I think a lot of growth is becoming more and more aware, becoming more and more humble, becoming humility allows. I just love these few things. Is humility allows me to look at myself and think, oh, okay, I could have, I can do better, and I'll learn from this lesson, and that there's can be acceptance there, and the self compassion and giving myself the same compassion that I would give somebody else that I care about, which is so hard to do, and then when that's practiced more and more, and Tara, who's on, was just talking to me about this, about trust. We see evidence in our lives that things work. The thing that's supposed to show up shows up, whether we like it or not. Sometimes it's something we really like, sometimes it's not, but we see that those things are there to help us. And I think a good place that I could end with this is, I love this saying is, and I love coming back to it for myself, is life isn't happening to me, it's happening for me. So when I think life is happening to me, it's that no. But when I see that life is happening for me, it's that yes, and it's that trust.
Whew. Sorry, it got dark in my room. No, you know what? I didn't even think about self-acceptance, and I'm with you. I'm on the struggle bus as well. Every day is a challenge for me as far as self-acceptance because of all the conditioning, things that happened. We all have some sort of trauma. We all, trying to live the best that we can. And shit, self-acceptance is huge. And I think it's the one thing that everyone needs to work on, you know, um, first, self-acceptance.
Yeah,
Damn. That's
yeah,
that's that's a big one.
yeah. And so I think the way we could sum it up, because you already did, Nada, but st- I some takeaways that I've gotten from this conversation is we see that what's happened has happened, and we just, rather than thinking that it should be different, we recognize that it is the way it is, and it couldn't be any other way. And then inevitably, there are going to be things that are going to be happening inside of us in response to stimulus and response. And whatever that thing that's happening inside of us, rather than trying to run from it or make it worse by taking that feeling and make it into a story about, oh, this is going to turn out so horribly, or I screwed up so badly, or this person's such a jerk. Just be more aware of what's happening inside of us. See that that situation is the way it is, and we can learn from it, feel what's happening on the inside, and don't try to run from it. Then it'll move through us, and start to see, when we move through things rather than be against them, then life starts happening for us, because we're not fighting with life. So people in life stop fighting back with us.
Yes. And those people that cause problems that you feel cause problems in your life, they just by default go away. That's so true. Um,
Yeah.
once you change your perspective. Um, yeah. And you know, at the end of the day, just do your best. Do
Yeah.
your best to live life. That's all we can do.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. Do you want to do you want to hang it up here since we've been on an hour?
yeah, let's do that. But I do want to do something real quick, which we didn't do in the first episode. Um, is basically you are a life coach,
Yes.
and I just want to make sure that people on here, he's awesome. Kent is awesome. You're a life coach. You work with. Um, well, I'll let you talk
No,
about what is your niche.
you're sweet. Thank you. So I specialize in helping people work through depression and anxiety, which is a lot of what we've been talking about. And it's to help people regulate their emotions. And what the byproduct of doing that is to start living a life that really is in alignment with the life that you deserve and want to live, and sharing your gifts. The pain can end up being turned in, transmuted into some kind of gift. So my specialty is to work with people, and I have a lot of experience this and working through this in my own life, who have depression and anxiety, and helping them to live the life they want to live. So if you're interested, you can. One way you could do it is you could direct message me, Kent Scheibel, but my website, and you can reach out to me there. And there's some free stuff on there too that you can get on, is kentscheibel.com, and I will need to spell that Kent, and it's SCHEIBEL.com. So, or
Just
you
like
can
your
message me
handle.
here. Yes. So I really didn't have to spell it. Yeah.
No, awesome. Yeah, and then for me, so I was a psychic medium. Um, did pretty well with that, but that's not my jam. Instead, I have a podcast where my goal is to provide people with alternative healing modalities, methods. So what I do is I promote people like Kent on there. We do interviews. So if people are looking for other methods of outside of traditional therapy, outside of traditional medicines, um, I have resources there that I'm working on amping up the website um, for that. So, and that's really just my goal, is to help whomever I can by providing them the resources, the connections, and just, we're all fumbling through life, and shit, we don't have to do it alone. So, but you and I are willing to talk about our fumbles. So that's why we're here.
Yeah, yeah. And what I want to say about Neyda is extremely talented at what she does. In this, she's just kind of asking questions here, but um, Neyda has this crazy gift of insight without even anyone. Let's just say that she has the ability to see into people without even knowing anything, and she is a healer, an amazing healer, who has a lot of talents in that regard, and this really humility that a lot of people. It's hard for me to have I really am inspired by your level of
Oh my
humility.
God. Thank
Yeah, yeah,
you.
yeah. So I want to say that, and her Nada's podcast. She's really good at bringing things out in people, and so that podcast. It's really, tell them how they can get in touch with you, Nada. I mean, where can they find you in the podcast?
Guided Counsel, Counsel. It's on YouTube. I'm now starting to focus more on it. I wasn't too much, but now like I'm reinventing myself. Excuse me, choking. And so yeah, I that is my path right now, is to just put the other stuff away and just focus on building communities, helping people come together, especially during this time where everything seems so like dire, so many things are happening. So and I'm going to tell you this real quick. As I was working psychic events and stuff like that, the one thing that I really noticed were the amount of people going through life without having anyone to talk to. And the reason why they were there was because they didn't have anyone to talk to.
Mm-hmm.
And when you're at psychic events, you see everything. So there is no judgment in those types of places. But there's a lot, I realize that there's a lot of people that are just in pain. And I'm like,
Yeah.
what can I do? You know, I wish I can solve world hunger. I wish I can adopt every child. I wish I can adopt every stray animal out there, you know, but at least this is something that I feel like I can give back to humanity and you know, help in some way. So it's people like you working with you, and I hope to have bigger projects as well to work with others. So
Yeah, well, you have a beautiful heart, and you're doing great work, Neyda. So so thank you for that. So Guided Counsel is where you can find Neyda. You have a YouTube channel, right?
I have a YouTube. What I don't have Threads, but I have TikTok and Insta and good old Facebook. So yeah, and you can always DM here. So, but anywho's, yeah, more to come because we're going to be doing a lot more projects together. So I'm really excited about that.
Yeah, yeah. So everyone, work on acceptance and keep in touch with us. Let us know how it's going. It certainly is a gift and a lifelong practice, but less um, less fighting with life in my experience, less suffering, and we move through the pain faster and learn from our lessons is what I would say. Thank you so much, Neyda.
For sure. All right, we're doing this again in 2 weeks, folks.
2 weeks.
2 weeks. All right. Bye.
Bye.